Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So I realized something about myself probably in the last year. I measure the intelligence, the sophistication, the wanting to be somebody's friend, really, all these things around a person's self-awareness. So the more I perceive another person to be, the more self-aware they are, the more I'm interested in connecting with that person. The higher intelligence I think they have, the more articulate I think they are. Like I give them a boost of a bunch of other characteristics that may not be valid just based on how much they're aware of themselves. And I think that's a bias I have. I don't think that's necessarily a good metric. I just recognize that that's how I judge other people often. And it's probably because I have the arrogance to think I am at the acme of self-awareness myself. And as we were preparing to talk about this idea today on the episode, Antonia, we were talking about like the difference between, just as an example, self-awareness versus self-esteem. And you said, well, you gave me this feedback. You're like, well, self-esteem is like, it's like an estimation. It's like a metric of something, but self-awareness isn't really a metric. It just is.
Mm. Yeah.
And I was thinking about that and I was like, well, that's partly true to me. And I guess I could say that self-awareness is really one of those things we can only see our progression in hindsight. Like, imagine self-awareness is like climbing a mountain. I'm halfway up the mountain. I'm not going to look up the mountain and say, oh, I lack awareness about myself. I mean, I may around specific topics that cause me pain, like if I'm a feeler, which I am, and maybe my thinking processes are not up to par like I wish they were. I might go, oh, I wish I had more awareness around this. But we usually think we're at the acme. We usually look down and go, oh, look where I was 10 years ago down that mountain. I'm so glad I'm so much more self-aware now. Like we never think, oh, it's going to continue. We're going to keep getting more self-awareness. We always think we've arrived.
Right. Yeah. Well, and just for the one person who doesn't know you're being facetious, you don't actually believe you're at the acme of self-awareness,
No.
But you're using that almost illustratively because...
Well, I think we all believe that about ourselves, right?
On some level, everybody believes that about themselves. If they thought that there was more to know about themselves, they would know it, right? Yeah. And when you're in, I think, when you're into things like personal growth and when you're into things like personality types, which give greater knowledge of oneself over time, I think we on those paths recognize that there's going to be more content coming. But I think as a general rule, most people believe that they're at the height of being aware of themselves and how they're coming across and what there is to know about themselves. If I could just ask you, what are you defining as self-aware? Like, how do you know if somebody has high self-awareness? It's
a good question. I think I would probably factor in a sense of their own motivations. So clearly I'm already seeing a pattern just saying that. Mm-hmm. I can already see myself filtering it through my personality type, my judging function of introverted feeling or authenticity. As an ENFP, that's how I have ENFP preferences. I think that's a big metric for me. If someone is aware of why they do what they do, they have high self-awareness in my mind. Mm-hmm. If they don't know why they do what they do, well, they're really low self-awareness. Like that's the biggest metric. The other one would probably be like a sense of situational awareness. So themselves in relation to their environment or others. Like how do they fit as a node in the greater system that's running? It's probably extroverted feeling and introverted feeling that I'm really looking at around like my metrics. Like it's probably feeling function stuff.
Yeah. Like how they're impacting other people in a social ecosystem, basically.
But it's also their environment too. Like a person walking along the beach that's not watching the waves roll in and it like knocks them off their feet. So it's not just other people. It's also the environment. So maybe it's not just the feeling processes. Maybe it's I don't know. Maybe I'm applying it to type too fast.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, making quick patterns. No, I think that there is something to that. I definitely judge people's inability to understand where they are physically in relationship to others. Like if somebody's, Bill Burr calls them in the way people, right? It's like, you've got a door into an establishment and you and like 3 of your family members are deciding whether or not you want to enter the establishment. So you're going to create a little circle in front of the door, preventing anybody else from coming in or out while you decide, right? And have a conversation while you decide whether or not you want to enter the establishment. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. And so I think I get a little judgy of that lack of awareness as well. But I don't know if that's like self-consciousness almost, like an awareness of one's relationship or how they're impacting other people outside of themselves. When I think about self-awareness, I also think it's really important, but I, on some level, don't expect other people to be very self-aware. I thought that was interesting that you were saying that that's something that you use as a criteria for the kind of people that you want to hang out with. Because I think my assumption about other people's self-awareness is I assume people have very low self-awareness. And I don't think it's inappropriate to attach it to type 2 early because I associate it with what people are not lying to themselves about, but I think I think it's associated with that. But the quality of their beliefs and how they're bringing their beliefs out into the world and how they're making assessments about what's good and bad information. And, it's all around things like introverted thinking criteria. And my assumption is that most people are kind of bad at it. Like, that they're not going to properly vet their information. They're not going to put it through a strong filter of reason and logic and ensure that it's, consistent. That they're not going to observe the paradoxes within and be careful about it. And so that kind of self-awareness, I don't have high expectations for people. And so I don't use it as a criteria for friendship because I kind of assume people are bad at it.
Wow. I think that the reason it's a criteria for me is it means that I can be a peer with that person. I don't have to do the awareness work for them. In other words, if we're hanging out at the beach, again, I'll use that beach example, and they're walking along in the waves and they don't want to get wet and they have low self-awareness. Now I have a job because I have what I would consider situational awareness. Now I have to watch for myself and I have to watch for them. And so it seems like more work for me to like be around people that aren't aware of, and then how they're affecting others or their own motivations, like all that starts to cascade down from just the situation itself.
Interesting. So you take it's almost like it creates a role or a job for you.
Yeah.
Whereas,
responsibility.
Yeah. I would totally let the wave knock the person down.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would totally let that happen
but
because.
But what if you have to shoot a video with that person like in an hour? And so like they're on your team and you're going to shoot a video and they can't get wet. They're just putting their feet in the ocean or other situations.
Yeah. I'd probably still let it happen. Or, and I would just go, well, I guess they show up wet. Or I would say in that moment, it's like, it's to my usefulness that they don't. And so I might be more vigilant if they couldn't get wet. Like if they're, headed to some sort of like wedding party or something and they can't get wet, I would probably be a little bit more vigilant. But in all other contexts, I that would not be my responsibility. I wouldn't think that was a job that I had to do. And in part because I think one of my core principles is that life teaches people the lessons they need to learn.
Yes. And I just had a thought too, that I think I have low self-awareness around. Because we talked about, we probably don't realize when we have low self-awareness, but I think I do. I realize I don't always know how I'm physically presenting myself to others.
Right.
It's something I've really worked at it. I've had to be mindful of it, but I haven't always been like, it wasn't on my radar. Like I didn't care about it. I didn't think about it. I was unaware by definition. And I've been really working hard on increasing my self-awareness around how I'm presenting. Mm-hmm. So, because I feel a certain way when I present to others. I know how I felt about it, but I don't know how they're perceiving it on their side.
So what would be an example of the disconnect?
There were a couple years ago, we were doing like a video of like a recording video. And I remember, we're like recording the video. We're actually in front of these same microphones. It was down in our like different part of our house, not here in the studio. And I was watching back the recording and I'm watching myself behave in these little ways, like, whoa, I behave like that on camera. Like I really looked insecure there. Oh my goodness. Like I looked way more upset than I should have been in that moment. Like wow, I didn't feel that way that I'm perceiving myself as. I felt very different in that moment. I felt way more sure of myself and in command of the situation and present. But watching it back, as a viewer, I was like, that is not the signal I'm giving to somebody. I look very insecure and shifty and tenuous. And so my feelings in the moment from inside of me looking out, if I hadn't recorded, I would have never known. Mm-hmm. But watching the recording gave me a glimpse into just how I'm actually showing up in front of others.
I also think that sometimes you're pretty intense, and I don't think you know how intense you are.
Yeah.
Like that's feedback you've gotten, that sometimes like your voice is louder than you realize, or your intensity is louder. In fact, I've noticed like in both our personality life path and profile training programs, which right now are primarily being done virtually.
Yeah.
You always warn people at the beginning, okay, I'm going to do an intro. My energy is a little intense. So if you want to turn your speaker down a little bit as I introduce this, because I think you've gotten the feedback that you can come across a little loud and intense, and you don't have an awareness around how other people are experiencing you. And so would that be self-awareness? Would that be awareness of self, or is it awareness of self in relation to others? And I think both of those are important components of self-awareness, because one is my association with who I am, and the other one is how other people are how my association with who I am is being experienced and then mirrored back to me, because that mirroring back is going to give me information that I'm now using to filter my understanding of myself. So even if it's other people's impressions, that still is important information. Like it's still something that we ends up becoming part of the equation of how we see ourselves.
Yeah. Do you make a separation in your mind between self-awareness and self-consciousness?
Yeah.
Do you conflate those two? Are they the same concept to you, or do you have a distinction between those?
Well, self-consciousness is, I think, or at least how it is generally used. Now, I haven't done a deep dive into the concept of self-consciousness like I have with other concepts of self. But I think usually people who are self-conscious are trying to see themselves through the eyes of others. And so they're primarily taking the lens of my impact on other people. I'm being conscious of how I'm affecting the outside world. And so heightened self-consciousness is usually about like, how are these people experiencing me? Whereas self-awareness takes in more than just that outer world reflection back. I think it also accounts for, like you mentioned, what are my intentions and motivations? Like, what am I bringing to the situation?
What's driving me from inside?
Yeah. What's going on internally, not just how other people are experiencing me.
So when you think about self-awareness then, because it's taking those other factors in, how, like, I want to get into personality types in a moment here and talk a little bit about this. And we also want to talk a little bit about the lens of self-awareness gives us access to seeing other parts of ourselves potentially. But before we do that, how would you, from a self-awareness lens, do you agree with me? So you said you don't judge people or like value them on their awareness levels, but how would you define self-awareness from your side? It's information tracking, belief tracking, more from maybe your cognition as ENTP preferences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's for me, the way that I generally experience or I tap into my own sense of self-awareness is what's making me tick. Like, what are all the systems running inside of me that make it so that my behavior is the inevitable emergent? And so it's a lot of, like, I just kind of see myself as being a bunch of systems running. And these systems are systems that are either just systems of organized information. You know, like they're systems I plugged in and organized information around. And because I organized them in a certain way, that's created a certain outcome or emergent of understanding. And then other systems were implanted, right? Like family systems and influences from my past and beliefs that are just in there. And so increased self-awareness is an awareness of what all those systems are, all the systems that are running. And so when I see a result or an outcome or an impact, then I use an understanding of those systems to try to be aware of what was the entire, like what happened from point A to point Z. What was the system running and the processes running, and then what was the final outcome result. And so then if I can track all of that, then I feel like I have a greater awareness of myself, a greater understanding. Now, obviously, that's very mental. I don't have a lot of awareness about like what I'm feeling or why. I try to get better. I try to plug good systems in that will help catch some of that stuff, but I'm not always great. I don't have heightened awareness of my physicality necessarily. I try to tap into it on a regular basis, but as much as I don't like in the way people, I actually don't know if I'm an in the way person. I think I usually am conscientious of that. I try not to be in the way person. And then every once in a while I am intentionally.
Sure.
And I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. But I think when it comes to the other, basically putting it in terms of type, the functions that are not my strengths are ones that I'm not even tracking. So I would not have even an idea of how aware I am about those things because I'm not paying attention to them. So I do think that self-awareness is the backbone of all the rest of our work. And it's also going to be sort of inevitably spotty. Like there's going to be areas in which we're highly self-aware and probably will judge ourselves and others on it. And then there's going to be other areas where we are not self-aware at all. And we just kind of shrug and go, well, is that one important? Who cares about that one?
Yeah. So we talked about self-awareness being an access point to see other parts of ourselves. And, we were talking right before we started recording this, we were talking about social media. And there's a lot of messages on social media. We've been on Instagram in the last few weeks because we've been trying to put more content on some of the social media channels, short form content, to make things more accessible, to expand our audience, to reach more people. And I've noticed what I did is through our account, personal hacker account, we started to follow a lot of personal growth coaches and people in the personal growth, I would say, industry or that want to do this. And so there's a lot of inspirational messages. There's a lot of messages around all the aspects of self, like growing your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-worth, your self-awareness or understanding, like all of these things. Like the self is very much, even in the collective frame of social media, there's a lot of focus on the self, which I like because in personality types, often people come to type and they want to apply it to their relationship to others. Like, how can I understand my boss better, my partner better, my kids better, whatever. And we've found that pushing ourselves to continue to refocus on the self using the personality tool, the lens of personality types, has been very powerful for us in our personal life, for the people we coach, and all of these things. So as you see these messages pop up online, what comes to your mind as you see a lot of these coaching messages and things through social media, kind of in the framework of self-awareness? Like, how does this land to you? Do you believe that, I don't know, I just want to hear your opinions on it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I even mentioned before that I do see a theme, and I guess, I mean, I always hesitate to say things because it sounds judgmental when I'm actually not being judgmental about it at all. But
you're creating distinctions about things.
Yeah, exactly.
And definitions. That's all we're doing here.
I'm going to slice some things out and try to create some definitions and some, yeah.
A side note, this is why introverted thinking, accuracy, we've nicknamed it accuracy, can sometimes feel divisive or caustic because the act of making a distinction or definition itself can sometimes to people feel attacking, like you're judging them, right? And you are using a judging function, but you're not necessarily judging anybody in that.
Right. Yeah. So here I go, not judging, but making distinctions. In Instagram, now I'll just be radically honest, I'm not a big fan of social media. Like, I really don't like most of it. The only one that I'm really on is Twitter, and I think it's because Twitter is a very introverted thinking space. It's like, here's 280 characters to give you my opinion on something, and I'm out, right? And now I bounce. So Twitter is the only one that I have any personal relationship to. All the rest of them are entirely business oriented, and I've played around with all of them, and they're just not my jam for the most part. So I haven't really had my finger on the pulse of the impact that a lot of these different styles of social media have on individuals. And what's interesting is I think that it makes me think of Homer Simpson's statement about beer. He's like, beer, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems, which I think is a fantastic statement about social media. It's like social media, the cause of and solution to all of your self-esteem issues. When you go through Instagram, you just get all of this aspirational like all these aspirational videos and photos, and you're supposed to be this thing, which whatever that thing is it's like worthy of putting on, social media. You want to highlight your best.
Yeah.
And it makes people feel really bad about themselves because they may or may not have whatever the thing is that you're highlighting. And then in order to balance the scales of the putting everybody's self-esteem through the ringer, then to counterbalance that are all these aspirational messages about how you should be accepting who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of, or at least in our curated social media, particularly I'm thinking Instagram right now, but I think TikTok's kind of the same way. There's a lot of messaging around self-acceptance and seeing yourself as being worthy and beautiful and valuable. And it kind of feels like it's just enough tonic to deal with the poison, right? It's almost like it's trying to offset itself. And I was thinking, well, I'm sure there are people out there. In fact, I know that there are people out there who curate their Instagram feeds and other social media feeds in order to have those messages just come through over and over and over again as these perpetual snacks of self-esteem hits, right? And to remind themselves, to give themselves permission, and that they're worthy and valuable, and that they have, that they have meaning. And, it's just like, don't be so hard on yourself over and over.
It's good affirmations, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's nice. But again, it's like the well on this side is poison and on this side is tonic, or is
healing waters.
Yeah, exactly. It's the medicine. And I'm like, well, what would a person need to do in order to bring all of that in-house, to not need to lean on aspirational messages over and over? How do you build all of these things? How do you build self-esteem and self-worth and self-value, self-confidence, self-trust? And so I started seeing these as what I call the selves, right? And I think that I think that it's vitally important to get in touch with all of these aspects of who we are and understand these aspects of who we are, as opposed to just admitting defeat, going like, I have low self-esteem. I guess there's nothing I can do about that. Or I don't have very high self-confidence. Right. I guess I got to go look at an aspirational message on Instagram to buoy that up. Right. Like, how does one get self-confidence? How does one build self-value or self-worth? How do you do that, as opposed to looking at somebody telling you you're allowed to have it? And so I started doing a deep dive into all of it. And in typical, introverted thinking or accuracy fashion, I went into creating distinctions, well-defined distinctions between all of these aspects. Now, the underpinning, of course, is self-awareness. Like, before you can get to because all of these other things, self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, all of these are judgments, right? And so because they're judgments, it means that they're going to give us prescriptive ideas, right? They're going to determine how we should or should not be looking at ourselves. But self-awareness is more aligned with perception. It's just how much territory we're able to see or take in.
Yeah.
So the bedrock underneath all of this is just having an awareness of self. And beyond what we're talking about, like an awareness of how we interact and engage with all of these different aspects. And so underpinning all of it is making sure that you have the awareness to be able to tap into your relationship to all these other self-judgment, criteria.
Yeah. So I think we could definitely say, just to establish this, that there is no one of the 16 Myers-Briggs personalities that's more self-aware than another. Like, it's not like ESTJs are the most aware of all the 16 types of the self or whatever. I'm just picking a random type. That might be the one you would pick, right? That's why I picked it. And it might not be that, like, an ESFJ or an ENFP is the least aware of all the types or whatever. And so I think that's an established, but we could say that each personality type has something that they have an easier time being self-aware around based on their cognitive wiring.
Yes, exactly. And we're all going to, I think, to some extent, define the way that the way our relationship to those things, awareness and all of that.
Yeah.
We're going to think of that as the way to be self-aware.
Like its importance, its ability, like all the things we'd focus on based on how we're wired for the awareness level. So like the self-awareness, that's a broad category. But like I said, I'd value it as like my motivations. Introverted feeling people, authenticity users, so FPs in the Myers-Briggs system, are probably going to have a proclivity to being more aware of our own internal motivations.
Right.
Whereas maybe a TJ may not be as much, right? Because it's a little bit lower down in their cognitive wiring, but they might be aware of other things.
Right. Or somebody with extroverted feeling or harmony preferences might define it more as the ability to read a room and to calibrate to that.
And know their relationship in that room and their status in that room.
Yeah.
Knowing all those things.
Or how to be part of the overall connectedness of the room as opposed to taking. And so self-awareness for somebody of that style might be like understanding how you're showing up and how other people are experiencing you.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're all going to put more weight on our definition of it. But I think that, like you said, every personality type is going to have its own sweet spot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And the capacity to either introspect and get deep, or the capacity to understand one's relationship to the outside world and how others are experiencing that person. And so both of those things are, as we mentioned before, they're both really important and crucial.
Yeah. So that's the first point that I wanted to establish, that I think that no personality type is more aware of the self than the other. It just might be the qualitative nature of the awareness. Mm-hmm. But all of us have the ability to increase our self-awareness.
Yeah. Or the categorical nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what would follow then, the next principle that I think is interesting is, in order to grow self-awareness, it's an indirect path. I mean, you probably could focus on it and increase it directly, but you don't know what you don't know. So how could you focus on what you don't see? How could you grow something you're unaware of, by definition?
Right.
So by focusing on the other aspects of self, like growing your self-esteem, growing your self-confidence, growing your self-value, your self-estimation, all these things, this could potentially now, because we're actually working on aspects of ourselves, now we're actually increasing our self-awareness as well through the work of growing these other elements.
Right, because we are going to just naturally be aware of the effects of those things. We're going to feel them. If we have low or high self-esteem, we're going to experience that. We're going to feel it. Whereas if we have low self-awareness, we might never feel that. Like, it just, we'll get experiences and results from it, but we might not be able to make the connection. So I think that, we're kind of merging different concepts here, but it's taking an understanding of our natural tendency to be aware of different elements of reality and ourselves in reality, depending upon how we're pre-wired. So it's taking these different categories of awareness, and then it's putting it through the filter of the thing that we all believe is a leverage point, which is self-acceptance, right? And having a better relationship to the self. And so we know when we have a good or bad relationship to self. We feel that. And we feel it in things like insecurity or uncertainty or an inability to, assert the self, or alternately overconfidence and cocksureness and, maybe overly asserting. But we feel it. We know it. And so, it's like an on-ramp. It's understanding our relationship to self through the results of all of these different areas that we all want to improve in.
Yeah. Okay, so we made a short list before we started recording on some of these selves. I'll just go down the list and we can start to unpack this. And we're probably going to need to record some extra episodes to really go deep about how to apply each of these categories to personality types.
Yeah, to like the specific types, I think. It's we early on said we're going to talk about this in the terms of personality type, and we'll probably weave some of that in. But I think we should probably establish a couple of principles, and I think that's going to go long. So then we can start filling it out in specific types in probably future episodes.
You want to do the principles first, or have me do this list first?
No, go ahead and do the list.
Okay, so the list we came up with, and I'm sure there's more selves to think about, but one of the big ones is self-esteem. Another one is self-worth. Another one is self-trust. A lot of people struggle with this idea of self-trust. The other one is self-value. And another one is self-confidence. So we actually talked offline about conflating or combining value and worth, because they're really close to do two full unpackings of each of those. We could probably combine those in one concept. They're different, but they could be combined in one concept.
Yeah, they relate to each other though. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that list.
And then we also mentioned self-acceptance too, which wasn't on this list that I wrote down after we started talking on this.
Well, just like self-awareness is the foundation, I think self-acceptance is the emergent.
Okay.
Like that's what we get. When we do this work, we end up experiencing self-acceptance, which is, it's like for a lot of people, that's a guiding star. Like, how do I accept myself more and more? And that's what all the platitudes are, right? Like, that's what all the little Instagram, cells that have like the little words and flowers around them and stuff, like that's what they're all trying to get people to do, is to accept themselves. And in a way where it doesn't mean that you necessarily are overlooking your bad qualities and not working on them, but more having a willingness to accept oneself at this moment in the timeline, so that there's not a bunch of mental real estate going towards fighting reality, right?
Yeah.
Because the magic of self-acceptance is that it frees up mental space to be able to do improvement. If we can't accept ourselves, then we hate that feeling, right? And we just end up in a hamster wheel of basically self-abuse. And so like get out the hamster wheel, become self-accepting, like accept where you are at this time. And then now you have all this mental real estate and all this energy to apply towards improving oneself to get to a place where you want to be. So self-acceptance becomes the emergent, and then that facilitates all kinds of good stuff. Yeah. So the way that I see this, like I said, I've been in my mind just sort of noodling through and calling it loosely the selves. That's how I experience it for me, because I've used a lot of this to calibrate, tweak, improve my relationship to myself, and so it's more than just like a casual deep dive. It's like something that I've actually been using in my own personal growth, is the selves. May have mentioned it on other podcasts, but I don't know if I have. So I want to start with self-esteem, because just like self-awareness is the foundation for everything. Like, we have to be able to see and perceive ourselves in all these different contexts to do any work. I think self-esteem is also like one layer up of foundation. So part of really getting into good definitions around this is looking at the etymology of the words themselves. Where do they come from? What was the original intent and meaning of this word, and how did it end up influencing how we see it now? So esteem comes from the same word as estimate, right? Or another word could be survey. To esteem something is to sort of understand the terrain of it and to be able to measure it. So self-esteem is, how are you measuring yourself, right? How are you taking in an accounting or a survey of who and what you are in terms of value? So self-esteem, the really important question underneath self-esteem isn't whether or not it's good or bad. It's, what are the metrics you're using? Are you aware of how you are estimating yourself or surveying yourself? Are you using these overly, idealistic metrics? Are you supposed to be perfect? Are you supposed to be, like what instruments are you using to measure that?
Yeah.
What are the metrics themselves? And so if you have a lack of clarity around how you are esteeming yourself and what you're using to guide that, then you can say good or bad, but it's like, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It just, it's going, well, that's a junk piece of territory. And it's like, well, how did you determine that? Like, is it because it's good or bad farmland? Is it because it's not, what?
Yeah.
How are you determining whether or not something is good or bad? And if we're unaware of what our metrics are, then that's a meaningless statement.
So you put it in a very binary frame, good or bad. But the image I call up when we talk about self-esteem, immediately that comes up to me is the idea of the estimation of a house I want to purchase. So there's a purchase price. Let's say a house is valued at $500,000, $500,000. That's the price on the house that somebody might want to purchase. You hire an estimator to come and give an estimated value of that house. It actually might be worth more than what the purchase price is. And I think the estimator takes in two broad categories. The first is the actual physical property itself, like the building materials, the house, the wiring, the electric, the property size, the water, sewage, like all the things that make the system of the house and the property valuable. Like they take that into account to estimate it. But there's another factor in real estate. They also take into account it's like relation to the value of other homes around it in the neighborhood and close by. So there's almost like an absolute value metric or estimation based on the material costs and the things that went into building the house and the property. And then there's a relational estimation on its related value, probably location comes into this too. Like if it's a beachfront property, that might be higher than the exact same setup inland, for example. And then it's also going to take into fact, is it beachfront property in like a really crappy part of town along the beach, or is it next to big, super big mansions and it has a lot of estimated value there? So could we say that personal self-esteem has those same two factors, an absolute estimation of self, as well as an estimation in relation to others? Mm-hmm. In other words, if I'm like, my self-esteem is I am in a tribe 200,000 years ago, and I've overcome a lot in this little small tribe. So I'm like the top of the tribe. And so I have an absolute estimation. I'm competent, I'm capable. And yet, if I took myself from 200,000 years ago, brought myself to modern times, maybe in relative estimation, I'm not that great. Like I can do like I can kill for my food and make a hut, but like I couldn't go to college. And so I think there's a relative element to this as well as an absolute element.
Yeah. I think the 200,000 year ago, you would actually outperform everybody now.
You get the point though.
But yes, I understand.
You understand the example.
Yeah.
Yes. True.
Yes. Is there absolute and relational? I think so. The challenge is that how does one determine absolute, estimation or absolute value?
It's so self, you have to do it for yourself.
Exactly. But if you do have one that's absolute, you should probably know what your criteria is.
Yeah.
So I think the reason why getting deeper into this concept of self-esteem is so important is I think most of us are blind to the criteria we're using to begin with. And if we like what is the, when they come in to survey and determine the value of the house, what are their metrics they're using? And you said that they're like using quite a few different metrics, right? They're using probably how good the house was when it was built and how much wear and tear is on it. And like you said, the location and maybe the potential, right? There's a lot of different things that they're taking into account to determine its own value. And I think we do that with ourselves. I think that's an absolutely brilliant analogy. I think that we do that with ourselves, but we need to know what we're using to begin with. Like, am I using how attractive I am? Like physically attractive? Am I using, and by the way, that would be only something I would know based on the response of other people. So it would be relational value, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because I may or may not care about my own personal attractiveness, right? So am I using it based on how smart I am? Am I using it based on how much resource I can gather? Am I using it based on how kind a human being I am? Like, what are my criteria? So when a person is trying to determine what their self-esteem is, the best gift they can give for themselves is to figure out what are the metrics they're using to begin with and how many of them are relational.
Yeah.
Like if there is an absolute and a relational, which is the one that's getting the greater weight? And I would say based on our personality type, that answer is different.
By the way, I said relative, not relational, but that's interesting you couch it that way because that's probably your framework, right? It is about relationship where maybe for a extroverted thinking user, it might be relation to wealth creation for them or the career ladder they're on.
Yeah. Relative is a great word too. So my apologies for jerking it over into relational. But I think the more a person is maybe like perceiver types that'll have introverted judging functions like introverted thinking accuracy or introverted feeling authenticity, the higher that is up in their stack or the closer it is to the driver in the car model, the more they're going to be using self-assessment as their guiding star, like as their first port of harbor. And the more they have an extroverted judging function, so like extroverted thinking effectiveness or extroverted feeling harmony, the closer that is to the driver position or the higher it is in the stack, the more they're going to use relative because that's how they understand things. They understand things in terms of its relative nature and how it, impacts the ecosystem. But you should know what yours are.
Yeah.
Right. Like, or which one's better or worse? Neither, both, right? Like, it doesn't matter. What are yours? And which one is the one that you have a harder time assessing?
Yeah.
Like the lower a function is, the more uncertainty you're going to have around it. So how are you determining these things? Are you beating yourself up, not because you're not a good person, but are you beating yourself up because you have uncertainty around whether or not you're a good person?
Yeah.
Right. Those two things are not the same thing.
I don't want to burn too much good content here because I want to do an entire episode around self-esteem.
Sounds good.
But I want you to finish your thought.
Right.
But I just realized we're going to run out of time to hit some of these others, just kind of get a quick list before we go to the next episode. So I'm just kind of directing us right now in real time.
Are you saying that I get on a roll, Joel?
Well, yes. And I want to pause it because I think I want to unpack this more, and I know we'll run out of time, everything. So I guess to land the plane on this then, self-esteem, we talked a little bit about this idea of absolute versus relative, but we also said that it's a assessed metric of some sort.
Right, exactly.
What that is may be different from each personality type, but self-esteem is an assessed metric of myself, both absolute and in relation to others.
And it requires a knowledge of one's metrics. And I think it usually requires tools, just like all surveying requires tools, right? So what are the tools we're using to determine that
social
estimation?
media? It's the best tool to use to use in this situation.
And then how often are we calibrating those tools?
Yeah.
Because there's no tool alive. There's no instrument alive that we use to measure things that doesn't need perpetual calibration.
Yeah.
So how often are we calibrating them?
The tools aren't absolute either.
Yeah. So that's self-esteem. And I think it's good to kind of lay that groundwork. It's like, well, we can't have anything else if our tools and our instruments and our reads are way uncalibrated.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. So you're listening along right now. We're talking about personality types and self-awareness. What is your awareness around your self-esteem? How are you measuring it? Are you measuring it in absolute terms? Is it in relative terms? Is it both? And maybe it's a percentage, like 20% relative, 80%, absolute or whatever. How do you determine this? And maybe it's categorical. Maybe you've got different versions of this. Like, let us know. How are you aware of the self-esteem you have in your own life, your own personality, your own type? Let's talk about self-trust.
I actually like to go to self-value and worth first.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, because they kind of build on each other, I think, to some extent. So, worth and value sound like synonyms, and I think that they basically are.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of a distinction when you go back to like the etymology of it, like the original source. So, I'm just going to kind of basically use a cheat sheet here to talk about some of the etymological differences because I think that they're important. So worth is, as a noun, it basically originally meant the price paid for something, right? What is the merit, the price paid? What is its monetary value in point of origin?
Yeah.
But as a verb, it originally meant to come to be. So almost like, is this thing at its highest peak of valuability? Right? Has it become the thing? Like a seed is not as valuable as a full-grown vegetable, right? I can sell a vegetable for more than a seed because the seed is the potential of something, but the vegetable is the manifestation of the potential.
Yeah.
So our worth, in part, is, are we becoming the thing that we're supposed to be, right? And the more we are, the more worth we have as we go down this line. But it's also associated with like inherited value or inherent value. So a seed still has inherent value, even if a lot of that is in its potential.
Yeah.
And the fruit or the vegetable has inherent value as the manifestation of the potential. But they both have inherent value because they're both something that, that has is worth paying a price for.
And we could also say that possessing them without altercation is valuable. Like to possess both the seed, now it might be different value or worth, but it's worth something to possess that seed, and it's worth something to possess that vegetable because I can turn it into more. I can make the vegetable into fuel for my body, and I can turn the seed into a vegetable that will eventually turn fuel into my body. So the worth is to hold almost.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's what is the intrinsic or inherent value of this thing, right? And that's, if you attach it to self-worth, what do I believe is my inherent value, either as a fully manifest self or as the potential of something? And am I coming to be the thing that is my value or my worth, rather? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my entrepreneurial mind immediately applies this to business to say there might be a business that's not doing really well, but I can see the worth in that business because I think the next thing you're going to talk about is the value I could increase in that business to make it more valuable than it already is. It's already worth something, but then I can apply skill, talent, resource, and make that something that's already worth something more valuable over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's really the application of something. We do something to turn something into more value.
Right. But the thing itself has worth to begin with, just through its existence.
That's right.
Right. So self-worth is understanding your value just by existing right now, either as its fully manifest self, like you've done all this great hard work and you've become the best version of yourself and you're totally, you've arrived. I don't know anybody who's there, but let's pretend you're getting closer and closer. And so you have a lot of worth for having arrived. But as a person who has not yet done that work, you still have the potentiality of it. Yeah. So how are you determining your self-worth, right? Your, like, the intrinsic value that you carry. That's different than the other word of value, right? Self-value. Value actually is, it's a little bit more performative. The etymology of that goes back to the degree to which something is useful. So one is intrinsicness, the other one is performative, right? I'm useful, and that's how I know what my value is. So they're related, but they're not the same, right? Because one has to be performed out.
Yeah.
I don't know what my value is until I'm performing my value out.
And conflating these causes tons of political lowercase p issues.
Right.
Right. Because, so let's just use an example of maybe an animal. So two certain types of dog breed, let's say German Shepherds. I'll just say a German Shepherd. Two German Shepherds are worth the value of living creature. Like, it's two German Shepherds or living creatures. So there's worth to that. I believe, and I think most humans would believe, there's worth to life. But if I train one of those German Shepherds to dance and juggle and perform in a circus, which I wouldn't do, but let's just assume, just for the sake of this argument, I know that's probably like wrong to say, and like animal lovers will be like, you cannot do that. I'm not suggesting, but it's a story to get a point across. I train this German Shepherd into some competency. Let's say maybe it's a service dog. Maybe it's a certain type of service dog that can help me if I can't see, to get around. The dog is still worth something that doesn't have that skill. But the value of the dog that I've trained to be a service animal, the value has increased. So the worth is still the same for both animals because they're living creatures, according to my metric. But the value is increased by the dog I trained to be a service animal. And that's kind of what we're talking about. That's really to land the plane in a practical way. That's the separation between worth and value.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it also depends on the position the animal is taking. Like a German Shepherd that has no capacity to do cool tricks or to be a service animal, but is a family dog, and everybody loves that dog, and they provide all of this incredible value for the family by showing love and being excited when everybody gets home and being a good protector.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to have high value. It's just going to be very specific to that family, as opposed to a service dog, which might have value to like a broader audience.
Sure. So then what logic follows for me, though, is, let's say I have a 5-year-old son who I believe has incredible amount of worth and potential value. But me at my age, 40 years older than that, almost 40 years older than that, I have done things in my life. I've created things. I've outputted. So this is where it gets a little touchy, is, am I more valuable as a human than maybe a 5-year-old child because I have more competencies, I've done more things? And this is where people start to have, this is where that lowercase p political comes in. It's like, no, everybody's got the exact amount of value, exact amount of worth. but there's not a separation in most people's minds between those two concepts. So we conflate
Right.
those and then we get real fuzzy. And the other thing is the value is still abstract and potentiality, if that's a word. It's still potential value. So we don't know what it's going to be. That 5-year-old might grow up to find the cure for cancer or create world peace. Like we have no idea the kind of value that person might create in the world.
Or be a serial killer.
Or maybe
and do the opposite.
Devalue, yeah.
Right.
So we don't know. So we say everybody has equal worth and also equal value because we don't know what the value will be.
Right. And that's actually not true. I think that we do all have equal worth, which is the intrinsicness of it.
Yeah.
But we don't all have the same value because we're not all performing at the same level. And so there is...
That's going to be a touchy thing for somebody to hear right now.
Oh,
what you
okay.
just said.
Well,
because
yeah.
I mean, that goes against a lot of people's belief systems.
Well, and that's why it's nice to create distinctions here.
Yeah.
And that's why you said when introverted thinking creates distinctions, people get touchy because they think they're being judged. This is not a judgment on a person's intrinsic worth.
Yeah.
But it is an acknowledgement that people have varying rates of value. I mean, are we going to say that literally everybody has the same amount of value after I just introduced the idea of a serial killer?
Some people say that. I've heard a lot of people say that kind of idea. Like that's a very common, popular thing that I see on social media and in popular culture.
I don't know if anybody fights for the value of people who are murderers. Now, the right to life, worth
of their life. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
the worth of their
right.
life, but that's different than their value to society.
Yeah,
right. Which is why
that's why they get locked up and
that's right.
taken away from society.
That's right.
Their value is the negative.
Is in the net negative,
Yeah.
exactly. And so a society has to be protected from them because they take value as opposed to giving it.
Yep.
So when a person is going back to the self concept, when a person is trying to determine one's self-worth, but they're using their performative, like their performance to determine their worth, they're actually conflating value and worth. And it's nice to be able to rest into an idea of intrinsicness. Like you have worth as living organic tissue with consciousness, right? Like there's an intrinsicness to it. Now, you might be highly nihilistic and go, well, nothing has value, and that's fine. And then you don't need any of this to feel better about yourself because it's all a flat land anyway.
Yeah.
Right. But as soon as you start putting things like value and worth into a dialogue, right? The assumption is that we're going to not just think everything is completely nothing or all yes, right? If there's any sort of metric, if there's any way to create a metric around any of this, then now let's assume that we do have intrinsic value or intrinsic worth, or we wouldn't be having the conversation around people's inability to accept that about themselves.
I think we can make that assumption, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want to challenge that assumption. I think that's an assumption we can establish and move on from, yes.
All right. Sometimes when you, like a
mismatch.
The mismatching and representing the person who's not at the table, right?
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, for that person, let's pretend. All right. So that said, self-worth is nice to rest into if you believe that there is a preciousness of life, then you belong to the preciousness of life. And your worth is inherent. It's intrinsic. You don't have to do anything to gain it. You just have it, right? You're either a bunch of potential in front of you, or you're a bunch of manifest potential, or maybe even a small amount of manifest potential. Maybe you haven't reached your full potential yet, but it doesn't matter because you still have worth as somebody who has potential inside of you.
Completely agree.
Right. And so that's a nice one to create clear definitions around because you can kind of relax into it. It's like you don't have to have low self-worth because that doesn't mean anything. That's like that's almost a contradiction of itself. But value is different. Self-value is a different thing. So this one's less conceptual. This one's less of a universal principle. It's more about your performance. It's what you're giving to the world. And so assuming that we have self-awareness and assuming that we have good tools, right? Our estimations of ourselves are well calibrated and we're using good tools to determine that, then there's only two things that give us low self-value. The first one is that we are expecting more out of ourselves than is reasonable. And so our value is not, it's like fantasy metrics, right? They're not real. Like we're either doing our best, right? And we're really trying to perform our best out in the world, and we're either doing our best, and so it's okay to, use those as our estimations, or we're not doing our best and we're beating ourselves up over it. And that's it, right? We're either doing our best and have low self-value because our instruments are off, or we know where we should be at and we're not there. And the only thing we can do to gain self-value is to work toward it, right? And so when people say they have low self-worth, usually what they mean is low self-value. And it usually means because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, that might sound harsh too, but I mean, that's basically it. Like if we have these estimations, we need to be fulfilling them.
Yeah.
Right. So then after self-value comes...
I was going to insinuate one, but you want to go in a certain order.
Go ahead.
So,
yeah.
No, you tell me the order, because I've got trust and confidence still.
Yes.
So which one comes first in your mind, after esteem, value, and worth? Is it confidence or trust?
I think confidence is easier. So let's go to self-confidence. Now, as opposed to worth and value.
But wouldn't self-confidence be an emergent, though? Not something you build toward? It'd be an emergent of these other things, almost like self-acceptance.
It is. It is an emergent, but it's an emergent that we deny ourselves a lot.
Gotcha.
Okay, because we're not doing the right thing. So self-confidence is going back to, again, I'm going to check my notes on what I had is the etymology. It goes back to basically like the point of origin is to confide in, right? Confidence is to confide in. Well, who do you confide in? Who's the person who you would go to, talk about your difficult day? Well, it's somebody that you have an assurance or belief in their goodwill, that they're going to treat you well. Like if you confide in them and you tell them your secrets, that they're not going to beat you up over it, that they're going to hold space for it.
So immediately I'm thinking of my inner critic. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of the part of me that's going to not have that mean voice that tells me I'm doing everything wrong. And if I've got good self-confidence, I'm not going to have that voice. I might have that voice, but I can just say, no, I trust that I'm telling myself the good things. Like, you don't need to tell me all this crap, and I can silence it basically.
Yeah. Well, and not just, like if you went and told your friend your deepest secrets and they just criticized you the entire time and told you that you did all of these, you made every decision was the wrong decision and how could you do that? And it would be like, well, you could still go confide in them later, but are you really going to trust their feedback? Because clearly they're not really helping guide you in the right direction. They're beating you up, right? For no reason. Like you confided in them. So they should be able to hold space for that confidence, right? The thing that you told them. So how do we gain confidence in ourselves? Like you just mentioned, well, we don't beat ourselves up over the things that are true for us, right? Our secrets or the way that we approach life, or like the things that weigh heavy on our heart, the things that mean something to us. We're not going to beat ourselves up over those things because, well, who wants to confide in a person like that?
I just wrote down the word undermine.
Mm-hmm.
We don't undermine ourselves through how we talk to ourselves.
Right.
Because I think confidence is, we know, if I have a confidence in you, I know that you will not undermine me in our relationship, mm-hmm. in our dynamic.
Right.
And so we do that to the self. We say, I'm not going to undermine myself through self-criticism, through maybe sharing secrets that I don't really want to share about myself, or parts of myself that are in confidence with me that I shouldn't just put out there for everybody, because mm-hmm. I'm undermining my ability to be a vessel of integrity, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and that's why the word confidence is also related to the word bold, because if you undermine your ability to, like if you're constantly undermining yourself, you're not going to be creating courage. You're going to be doing the opposite. You're not going to be self-supporting. You're going to be self-sabotaging. And so as you gain more confidence in yourself, you start to lean in on your ability to handle things, because you're not going to bring in a self-sabotaging energy. You're going to bring in a courageous energy, one that's cheerleading the self. And so it's also related to trusting one's own ability to get through something without having extra aid or other people to have to come save you.
Yeah.
And the more the more self-sabotaging you do, the more you need everybody else to come in and swoop in and save you from yourself, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then on top of that, there's an association with having confidence in one's own judgment and ability. So you've got not just I'm not going to undermine myself, but I actually know that I'm the kind of person who can handle this. Like, I've watched myself overcome obstacles. And instead of overcoming the obstacle and then beating myself up over everything I didn't do, or looking at it as an undermining energy, I'm going to look back at that and go, oh, I totally handled that. That was really good. I'm proud of myself. I'm going to cheerlead myself, and I'm going to now rely on my ability to do that again. So it's not just overcoming obstacles. It's overcoming obstacles and then taking an honest accounting of them and owning all the great things you did to give yourself more courage, more boldness, and more self-assurance to be able to handle a situation like that again in the future.
Which, two things, brings, number one, brings self-esteem back into the picture, because you're now estimating again your confidence levels, your ability to overcome things. But number two, and if you're listening, pay attention to this, self-confidence can't be gained by thinking about it or stewing about it. You have to take action to get the reference experience to have the self-confidence. So you can't do it in the abstract. You can't just think about it and have more self-confidence. You've got to go take an action, watch yourself take that action, feel and see the result of that action, catalog it, review it, estimate it, put it in your confidence bank. And you do this over and over and over again. That's why older people often tend to have more self-confidence, because they have more life behind them. They've watched themselves for the past 40, 50, 60, 70 years take actions, overcome things, do stuff in the world, and then take estimation of that. And younger people haven't had that as much. There's a little more insecurity, I think, because there's not as much action that's been taken. I would say confidence is very much tied to actions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think older people have also learned that there's a lot of diminishing returns on getting through tough times and beating yourself up over them.
Yeah.
You get to this point, you're like, that's actually not helping.
Yeah.
Maybe I should stop being so hard on myself. Maybe I should go, no, actually, if I survived it, I did a good job.
And then that word boldness, you both need boldness to take the action, right? And which also gives you boldness having taken the action. Mm-hmm. It's like self-feeding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as that, sort of as you go down that road and do that more and more and more, then the gains become faster and faster. And so self-confidence on some level is a bit of a hockey stick. Like, once you tap into the ability to feel self-confidence, it multiplies itself over time. And I think that while there is value to people not pushing themselves beyond what they can handle, I do think that we have a tendency to err on the side of not pushing ourselves enough. And so not pushing ourselves, being gentle and easy on ourselves, is a lot of times a self-sabotaging action. It's like, how far can you push yourself? Is it 5%? That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's enough to keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
If you go easy on yourself, if you kick the can, if you go, and then as people are easy on themselves, they wonder why they lack self-confidence and self-esteem, right? They wonder why they lack all of these selves. And it's because some of it is definitely evidence-based, and this is one of them.
Well, the stakes are higher the older you get too. Mm-hmm. And I am so grateful and thankful to my parents who did put the pressure on me to do things when I wasn't ready for them. They kind of almost gave me a push of synthetic boldness to go take actions in my life as a young person. And what was nice about that is if I crashed and burned, or I was uncalibrated, or I made a mistake, I had a safety net of my parents to fall back on. Mm-hmm. So thank God that I didn't have to learn that in my late 20s, early 30s. They did it when I was young enough I did make the mistakes. I did mess up, but I could rest into them as people who were encouraging that in me. And then they had my back. They were able to support me through that. Now, not everyone has that experience. You may not have had parents that helped push you in an environment where it was a container of a safety net. You're on your own and you don't have the discipline or the push from your childhood to lean on. This might be tougher for you. This might take more boldness, if you're listening along, to go create that confidence for yourself. Basically, we're talking about self-parenting now. So you're gonna have to create context, and you can have community support. Other people can be around you, but really it's about getting yourself in those environments, that boldness, that push when you're not ready yet, totally.
So finally, it's self-trust. And we build trust with ourselves just like we build trust with everybody else, right? We hear ourselves making statements of intent, or we hear ourselves making commitments, and then we watch ourselves follow through with them. Like, we can trust ourselves if we say we're going to do something and then we do it. You know, I'm going to get up and go to the gym at 9 o'clock in the morning or 8:30 in the morning. Oh, I guess I slept in. That's not that big of a deal in the action itself necessarily, but it is when we watch ourselves do that over and over and over, and it erodes our ability to trust ourselves. Like, it erodes our ability to believe ourselves when we say we're going to do something. So trust goes back to things like integrity, veracity. Veracity is basically the old-timey word for radical honesty and being honest with yourself, right? It taps into this idea that, it's about faith too. So I remember back in my religious days that there is a biblical scripture in the Greek scriptures, or what people know as the New Testament, that the Apostle Paul was defining faith. And the translation I grew up with was as the assured expectation of things hoped for, the evident demonstration of realities though not yet beheld. And the footnote on it, or like the reference, was a title deed. So if you had the title deed to a property, even though you were not on that property yet, that title deed was it was a piece of evidence you could show people that you owned that piece of property, even if you weren't there. So it was a piece of evident demonstration. So faith in oneself is built on trust, right? Trust in oneself. And that means you have to have, just like with self-confidence, you have to have a bunch of pieces of evidence to indicate that you can believe that piece of information that you just stated about yourself, that you can lean in on your ability to perform or act out, or to be radically honest with yourself, or to be intellectually honest, or to be emotionally honest, right? Like, you can trust yourself to show up as your best, and you have all of these title deeds around doing it again in the future.
So as you're listening along, one of the key things, again, to remember is these are all interrelated. As you grow one, I think others grow with it. Self-awareness grows when you work on these other aspects of self, self-esteem, self-trust, value, worth, confidence. All of these things add into our self-awareness. So I see it as, I think you do too, Antonia, if you want to increase self-awareness, no matter what your personality type is, focus on getting reference experiences around these other self things. Mm-hmm. What do you think? What's coming up for you as you're listening along? Is this resonating with you? Does this make sense? Do you think this will work in your life? Is this something that you can tap into and connect with around all these ideas of self? How do you define self-awareness? How do you know if you're aware of things, not? Have you looked back on your life as you've gained awareness and you're like, oh, I wasn't as aware then as I am now, and you've increased it over time? How do you think you've increased self-awareness? Just time? Did you do something specific? We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Personal stories are atomized experiences. They're the experiences you've had in story form to let us know how these things work in your life.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And you can subscribe to us on YouTube, because we now have a video podcast that we are doing that you're looking at right now if you're on YouTube watching this. So feel free to subscribe, like, and subscribe, right? And turn on your notifications or whatever else you're supposed to be doing on YouTube to make sure that you know when the next episode is out. Somebody actually made a comment, you're allowed to say these different at the end. And I'm like, but if I automate it, then I make sure I hit everything, but I'm still getting it down. All right. And if, did I already say you can leave a rating and review for us on iTunes if you enjoyed it?
I think so.
I'm not going to hit them all.
Just do what you normally do. Okay. It's fine. You can just go right into your automated.
I'm going to go into my automated. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms, leaving a rating and review. If you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe on YouTube because we are now doing video podcasts. And if you liked us there, you can put it. Wait, okay.
Why is this so hard for
I don't know.
Like, what
I'm
is
having a hard time here. I think it's because I've been doing the other way for 8 years.
And so it's just like changing. But just pretend like the camera's not here. Like, is it just the fact that there's just camera and lights? It just changes the dynamic for you.
Well, I think it's because I have to add the YouTube piece, and I'm not 100% sure how that all fits in everything. Yeah. It's like, how do I wedge the YouTube piece in?
Well, maybe I could do it at the end, just tack it on after you're all done.
Yeah.
For a time until it becomes more of the new way of doing it or something.
Right. Or you could say it before I go into my thing when you say, leave a story.
Okay.
And then you could say the YouTube thing, and then I can say all the other things that I've always said.
All right, let's practice.
Okay.
So what do you think? Come over, give your story, personalhacker.com, ...
Yeah.
And also, don't forget to subscribe and like this video on YouTube. We want to release more content on YouTube, not just podcasts, but other event videos. Like we want to film us at different live events and other content that we'll be releasing there. So go over to YouTube and make sure you subscribe.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us, it helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. See?
You nailed it.
I nailed it because
it's just the YouTube, that pesky YouTube thing.
It's the YouTube. It's like it's not in the synaptic neural highway yet. We also have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. My personal favorite right now that I've been encouraging people to grab a copy of is the Tools for Emotional Survival series, especially since the world is harsh and depending on your personality type, you're going to respond in different ways. And so stress management and getting to a place where you're really understanding joy, I think this is important. So if that sounds interesting to you, or if you really are looking for any other resources on your growth journey and you would like to understand these concepts through the lens of type, head over to personalityhacker.com, look at our catalog of programs and see which one is right for you.
Join us as we continue the series. We're going to unpack self-esteem, self-trust, value and worth, and self-confidence through the lens of personality type. We're going to apply this to the 16 different Myers-Briggs types. So we're looking forward to talking to you on the next episode. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.